Hello, you are welcome to another episode of African Drama Tutorials. I am UVIE and it's always a pleasure having you here with me. Now, African Drama Tutorials is strictly about African drama. We will discuss everything as relations to African drama. Probably there are times we could dive into poetry or African oral literature, but then this is strictly about African drama. Now, this has been a long awaited episode, and I seriously apologize that I had to delay this long to deliver. But this is a continuation of the first episode, which I was graced with a guest, Bola Kale, who did beautifully well on that specific episode. We got to discuss on Professor Wole Soyinka's Lion and Jewel. It was such an exceptional experience. In fact, so many people got to call me to tell me how much they had learned from that specific episode. Even for those who have never read the book, they fell in love with literature instantly, and I feel really good that I'm able to pass that. Okay, but this specific episode is a continuation and the concluding episode actually of that specific episode, which we got to discuss on Professor Wole Soyinka's The Lion and the Jewel. I will be touching on things that earlier we did not discuss on. And this is theory, figures of speech, and structure. Okay? Now, talking about theories. Two theories are quite potent in this piece. Now, this is based on my own analysis. And the beauty of literature is the liberty to enjoy perspective, and you just might be right in your perception. Sometimes the writers don't even know the impression they're giving with their pieces, but then something comes beautifully out of the entire thing. And before you know it, it's up for some kind of analysis that even the writer didn't even put into perspective. Now, let's dive into the work. Two theories, like I mentioned earlier, are actually potent in this piece, based on my analysis, and that is post-colonialism and feminism. Now, when we're looking at things from the aspect of post-colonialism, for those who do not know what post-colonial theory is, post-colonial theory is the academic study of colonialism, the effects of colonialism. Basically, it's the study of the cultural legacy left behind from colonialism and imperialism. And the beauty of all of this is how Professor Wole Soyinka was able to impact every single thing that came out of colonialism and how it had affected the cultural lives of the people of Ulujinle. Now let's look at things categorically. Let's look at the figure of Lakunle, the school teacher. Now, this is someone who has really digressed from his Yoruba culture and has infused himself with a myopic perception of westernization. And how he goes about it, he loses himself this much that he has forgotten his identity, where he's from, what he's made of, and he's pursuing another identity entirely. And in the process, he's trying to influence CD into all of that. But then City doesn't see things that way. City still tries to maintain her cultural identity, emphasizes on the fact that my name is City on their first when we get to see them on the first act and all. We get to see that she keeps emphasizing on her cultural identity as a Yoruba girl, as an African girl, and how she's not willing to neglect all the cultures and traditions that come with it. So we get to see Lakunle running away from the idea of the bride price, because he doesn't see it as something that should be a part of anyone's culture, considering that we are supposed to have some kind of westernization in our environment at this point in time. We're supposed to start seeing things from a foreign perspective. So that's why he was not open to the entire thing. But then if we now decide to academically study all of this, we get to see how the impact of colonialism and imperialism had affected Lakunle to that extent that he doesn't have a clear view of what he's even gone in for. He's quite myopic about the entire thing, but then he pushes for it with so much energy. Now we get to see further with the photographer who took City's picture, okay? And we get to see pictures, that's the invitation of westernization. There's a magazine. CD is there, the front page of the magazine, and then Baroka is in a very tiny corner there. Yes, we get to discuss all of that eventually. But then we see that the colonialists, beg your pardon, had introduced something to the people of Lujule with that magazine. There's a perceptional change, if you ask me. Like an instant change, especially on the part of CD, who suddenly becomes twice more egotistic, if I may say, and seeing that she's there in front of a magazine, there's still some kind of cultural conflict there because, okay, magazines are definitely not part of us. It's something that's been introduced by the West. Then, that has already introduced her to another culture entirely, and that is a white man's way. Definitely not an African thing, but then she's blown away by it. Quite interesting. Then we get to see another aspect. The train, the building of the train rail. Baroka was supposed to invest in all of that. Rumors had it that he had actually not invested in it, and he had sidelined the fronts. Somewhat, you dive into the idea of neocolonialism here, where you get to see the effect of when the colonialists leave those they had colonized, and those people do not make things better for themselves, rather they make things worse. In my perception, there's an atom of corruption in that entire picture. However, Baroka disputed all of that, and he said it's not true. We get to see a fax machine in Baroka's abode, which CD is carried away by. She is fascinated by the entire idea. All of those are put together like a seduction tactics. And then the idea of the train station. Definitely, it's a foreign idea, bringing that form of transportation to our environment. Then another interesting thing again is when the white man came in with a car. Okay? And then they gave it a specific name. We get to talk about that when we're talking about idioms. And they are introduced to an entire life, a different thing entirely. There's a cultural switch for them, and they are fascinated by it. So it's not like their perception has actually changed anyway. There seems to be a conflict in one way or the other. If you look at things, there's more of like their tradition on one end, at the other side they are fascinated by the Western ways of doing things. And the extraordinary things, I like to put that into inverted commas there, extraordinary things that must have brought into that environment. Now, one way or the other, that has a way of affecting people. So now we just get to see how the entire environment is not the Elujule that it used to be, because people's perceptions are gradually changing, except for those who decide to hold it strong. But then one way or the other, they find themselves in a changing environment. Now, this sounds like an inconclusive situation. But keep going. Now, let's dive into the second theory, which was potent in this piece, and that is the feminist theory. Now, the feminist theory is an extension of feminism, and it's an academic analysis of gender equality. We get to see that in the figure of CD and Sadiko. CD was trying to make an impression. The fact that she's egotistic is there, but then given that she felt so powerful suddenly, like she's above the Baroka, given that her picture is someplace at the corner there, she just felt she could conquer anyone. In the case of Sadiko now, when Baroka lied about his impotency, she felt they had conquered Baroka, and so she now brought there's this figure. She came out with a figure to mock him, say things like, "Oh, we women, we have conquered you," etc. So in that specific scene, or rather in their individual roles, you get to see how they are trying to establish an equal place for women. An equal place where there's a possibility that the woman is not just an ordinary person who you could just have as a prized possession, But then this woman is capable of conquering you. She's capable of having an ego. She's capable of doing a lot of things too as well. But then they're just trying, if you look at those two figures, they're trying to establish an impression. You know, they're not just ordinary people. They're trying to be figures in the environment. CD automatically has become a figure, given that she was the face of the magazine. She has automatically become a figure. Now she has sort of established an equal ground with Baruka. And that's why she was courageous enough to step up to him and bask in the whole mockery until she was eventually conquered. And then we look at Sadiku too. You see the way she regards Lakule, although she's still so servile to Baruka. But then at the back of it all, she's definitely not as submissive as we think she is. She wants to see him fall. That's definitely not part of feminism, for the record. I'm just trying to say how these women are trying to establish an unconscious level of equality in the society by making an impression. Now, that concludes its theories. Let's dive into figures of speech. Okay? Now, let's like a typical teacher, I think I have to dive into my book, although this is not your regular kind of tutorials, for the record. But then I'm diving into my book. Okay? So diving into the figures of speech explored in this book, The Lion and the Jewel by Professor Wole Soyinka, we get to see the use of biblical allusion. Biblical allusion. I won't spoon feed you on that. I suggest you go and research. But then if we were to look at things, or rather this specific figure of speech being explored in the work, let's start with a speech. Yes, let's start with the conversation that Lakule had along the line. That was in Act 1, which Professor Wole Soyinka named as mourning, for the record. A prophet has honor except in his own home. That was said by Lakule. Now this is definitely picked out from the Bible, a saying by Jesus Christ. And the Bible verses that this can be found are in John chapter 4, verses 44, Luke chapter 4, from verses 16 to 30, can be located there, Mark chapter 6, verses 4, and Matthew chapter 13, verses 57. You get to see that Professor Wole Soyinka was, what you call it now, aesthetically brilliant to attach that specific verse, that specific saying of Jesus Christ, implementing it into this specific piece to create an expression, an impression rather, and allow Lakule to express his situation at that point in time. Now, another aspect here, which was also said by Lakule again, Lakule says, "For that, what is a jewel to pigs is also picked from the Bible." And this coincides with Proverbs chapter 11, verses 22, which says, "Have you ever seen a pig with a gold ring in his nose?" How profound. Now, another use of biblical illusion is, "And the man shall take the woman, and the two shall be together as one flesh." Also said by Lakule. And this is found in Genesis chapter 2, verses 24, and Mark chapter 10, from verses 8 to 10. That's a biblical reference on marriage. And then there's another biblical reference. "My Ruth, my Rachel, Esther, Bathsheba, thou son of fabled perfections." Now, from Genesis to Revelations. This is Lakule referring to CD, or rather placing CD as some of the great women in the Bible. My Ruth, my Rachel, Esther, Bathsheba. Quite interesting. Just to digress a bit, with all of this biblical illusion being used brilliantly by Prof. Soyinka, we get to see that Olakule is introduced to another kind of religion, which is Christianity. And in his belief, Christianity is an elite structure. So basically, CD is an illiterate in this situation. She doesn't understand this specific thing. It simply means that she's not woke enough. Let's use our millennial terms here. She is not woke enough because she's not part of Christian religion. But then Lakule uses this to now express how extended he is in his supposed exposure as a learned individual by taking some biblical quotations. Okay? And reading to us that, okay, definitely, I am not on the same level as fellow people of Elujule. Now, another aspect or another figure of speech to explore there were metaphors. Metaphors, direct comparisons, they were explored in the piece itself. And then we get to experience assonance and alliteration as well as parallelism. Now, this is as a result of the fact that the piece was written in a poetic form. The entire piece was written in a poetic form. And like every poetry, there are different kind of elements that are being explored, especially the parallelism. And then the picture of assonance and alliteration, where we get to do with vowel and consonant sounds, makes a lot of sense. Give everything a rhythmic flow, a procession, a meaningful procession. Now, we are through at this point, okay, with the figures of speech. But then I am still open to probably many figures of speech that you may have observed. We are all learning. Now, let's talk about idiom here. Very interesting. I was captivated by this the first time I came across it. And this is supposed to be the idiom for, wait for it, on the devil's own horse. On the devil's own horse. Idiom for car. Quite interesting. That's the whole idea, devil's own horse. The car is referred to as the devil's own horse. Really interesting. But anyways, that's what it is. Then let's talk about the structure. Okay? Now, like I said earlier, it was written in a poetic form. So we just get to see the poetic arrangement of words. See the words are just following a metrical procedure, properly arranged, every single thing as meaningful as it comes. And then we're dealing with rhythm, rhyme, and a specific sort of frame. If you take the time to look at as a piece itself, I know this is not the original work, but you get to see that it's not like your regular play. Definitely, I don't think we can see this closely. Can we see this? I hope we can. But then this is what it looks like. Okay, it just carries a specific structure. For the record, we are not looking at things from structuralism point of view here, based on theory. No, we're just looking at form here. All right, we're looking at form here. So now, if you look at that structure, you get to see that this piece was done in a poetic form. Wonderful piece done by Prof. Soyinka. Now, I think that this is a wrap for us on today's episode of African Drama Tutorials, and I do hope that you've learned a lot. And even if you haven't, I hope that one way or the other, you must have captured something. But then I am very open to learning from you too as well. This is all for us to just all dive in, enjoy ourselves, and learn while at it. Now, this specific piece has a lot to refer to our situation as African people. The interesting thing about writers is they are actually prophets. And if there's anything that I must have learned from this specific book, is that in one way or the other, in the form of Lakule or probably Baruka, every other character there, you get to see some human features, that actually expose us, our perceptions. How myopic are we about them? What are our beliefs? How strong are we about them? How do we follow up on all of that? How do we organize our thoughts processes? And how do we reflect those things in our environment? And then we see the effect of colonialism. How far has it taken us? How far has he drawn us from our identity as African people? And there's just so much to examine this specific piece. And then the interesting thing is that it's going to be here for years and years to come. And you'd be surprised because it has a way of reflecting our society today. So I'm thankful that you came on board with me. You have yourself a wonderful day. Join me on another episode, and I will be discussing another book. And probably I will have a guest. And if I don't have a guest, you're going to see my fine face. Okay? Anyways, do take care and stay safe. Cheers.